Well, podcaster, journalist, and editor Bridget Phetasy has recently written an article where she talks about her experience on this side of the sexual revolution. And she says that she is the case study for whether this has been good for women. She wrote an article titled, "I Regret My Promiscuity." And here in this episode, we're going to talk about some of the quotes that she gave, how I think she has done an awesome job of being raw and vulnerable. I'm really thankful for her willingness to put this out there and write about something that's not exactly a popular commentary on the sexual revolution. But stay tuned to the end where I think that she exposes one of the greatest lies of the sexual revolution that was ever told. Well, this is Jason for Soulfire 209, where we want to offer gospel hope for a porn-filled world. This article fits right into some of the things I talk about here on this channel. However, this is not actually a religious argument. She, as far as I can tell, is not a religious person. She says she grew up Catholic, but the arguments that she gives here are not religious. She says the dark side of the sexual revolution is that even though it liberated women, unyoking sex from consequences has primarily benefited men. First off, I would say you can't fully unyoke sex from consequences. If you could, she wouldn't have written this article. But what do we see in our culture today? In general, the sexual revolution, it allows men not to require relationship, any sort of commitment, any sort of responsibility, and to be able to pursue sex for the sake of sex. And I would argue that when you have a culture where men do not have to take responsibility for sex, that culture will degrade quite quickly. Now, if you don't agree with me, argue with me in the comments, but I think when men don't have to take responsibility for their sex drive, we will have a lot of terrible consequences within that culture. This idea that the sexual revolution benefited men, I don't think is true either, because when society breaks down, when there's a lack of relationship, intimacy, commitment, and care, men are going to suffer as well. Think about some of the things that we see in our culture. STIs, rape, incest, abortion, sexual assault, hookup culture. The brunt of this comes from men having to take no responsibility from their sexuality. The sexual revolution told us that we should throw off the shackles of sex being reserved for marriage and to stay in marriage, and so we've done that. But what has been the cost of throwing out the idea of marriage, commitment, and relationship? So here she describes that using sex like a drug. She says, "I would have said one-night stands made me feel emboldened, but in reality I was using sex like a drug, trying unsuccessfully to fill a hole inside of me with men." Pun intended. Okay, I see what you did there. So we've removed sex from relationship. We've replaced intimacy and pursuit of more sexual conquest, of immediacy, immediate gratification. Novelty is something that we highly promoted by the sexual revolution. But the results are a lack of relationship, lack of intimacy, lack of care, lack of kindness. And also the results are not good sex. There are a number of books and resources, some I've covered here on this channel in Soulfire 209, that will document the reality that it doesn't even end up with good sex. It does result, however, in pain. Bridget Phetasy talks about this in her article. She says, "The lie I told myself for decades was, I'm not in pain, I'm empowered." And here, this is a dangerous message for her to spread. She's speaking against one of the messages of feminism, that freedom from the sexual revolution would actually be empowering to women. We've told our daughters that exploiting themselves by pursuing sexual conquest, lots of sexual relationships, would be empowering. But this ultimately can lead to brokenness and pain. And she goes on to explain this. "The culture was right there to pick me up and dust me off. I doubled down on being a proud slut and internalized the biggest and most damaging lie, that loveless sex is empowering. I basked in the girl power glow of that delusion for decades, weaponizing my sexuality while convincing myself I was full of the divine feminine." I think as a culture, we need to stop lying to ourselves. Free sex and removing sex from relationship and responsibility has not led to human flourishing. Rather, I would argue, it has led to cultural decay. It has led to brokenness and pain. Even the idea that a man could want more from her than just sex, she says she found suspicious. Whenever a man wanted to pick up the tab, or pull out the chair, or open the door, or pick me up, or take me to dinner, or see me during the day, or wait longer than the first date to have sex, I was shocked and suspicious of them. Was he a serial killer? Now, to this, I would have to say, men, we have got to do better than this. We've got to treat women better than this. This cannot be Their expectation. Women, you've got to expect more from men than just using you like an object, just pursuing you as a sexual conquest devoid of relationship, devoid of kindness, devoid of care. This is not empowering. In fact, I would say it's degrading. And it seems like in her article, she agrees with that idea. Casual sex is fraught with insecurity and miscommunication. Intimacy and love are punchlines. When a man I'd slept with had the courtesy to reach out, I mistook relief for happiness, rewiring my brain to be grateful for the bare minimum. The saddest realization is how low I had set the bar. How low was that bar set? No care, no relationship, no kindness even needing. The only expectation was sex. And I've talked about the hookup culture before on this channel in Soulfire 209, and one of the realities we see of that, from that lack of care, that lack of kindness, that lack of relationship, is brokenness, loneliness, and pain. And here we see what I would say is the biggest lie from the sexual revolution. She says, I wanted to be able to have meaningless sex like a guy, but it didn't work. After years of writing for Playboy, I've learned it doesn't work for a lot of men either. The lie here is that we could have sex without consequences, that you could have free love, free sex, and there would only be good and benefit from that, but no cost and no harm. The reality is, 60 years later, past the sexual revolution, nothing could be further from the truth. The idea of free love, free sex without consequences is a myth, and it is a lie, and it is being destructive to so many people in our culture today. You wouldn't have to get married, you wouldn't have to have a family, you wouldn't have to have responsibility, you wouldn't have to have intimacy, care, and concern. You could just have sex and it would be so, so good. Well, the sexual utopia that we have pursued, that we have hoped that we would find, is not out there. 60 years later, we are not free. In fact, one of the things I think you can look at is the increase in challenges of mental health. Just look at a graph of mental health over the last 30, 40, 50 years. One of the things that you will see is that it is not getting better, it is actually getting worse. So for example, according to Mental Health in America, suicide ideation is up. Depression is up. Use of drugs going up. Many of us in our culture are trying to medicate the pain through use of psychiatric drugs, use of other things like pornography to try to make ourselves feel better. We are not getting happier and healthier. So many things are getting worse. Now, I am not trying to argue that this is only the result of the sexual revolution, but I do think it is a factor. It is a factor of people not having a strong family community. It's a factor of people not pursuing deep, meaningful relationships and intimacy, having somebody that they can love, having somebody that loves them back. We've replaced all of that with the hookup culture, with the idea of just having free sex. The results, we are moving more and more toward unhappiness, not happiness. Let me know what you think, though, in the comments. Can you find what you're looking for in the hookup culture? Do you agree with Phetasy that pursuing the sexual revolution, pursuing some of the things that we were promised, will not lead to our good, but instead will lead to misery? But you know, this is a channel devoted to gospel hope, and I think there's a message here to offer gospel hope to somebody like Bridget Phetasy, who has experienced so much use and abuse and brokenness. She's saying that she was trying to fill the empty ache that she had inside with men, and she said, listen, it didn't work. Well, what is it that's going to work? What is it that our hearts and our souls are truly longing for? Well, I think of the words that Jesus gave in John chapter 4 to the woman at the well. Here was a woman very broken. Here was a woman very outcast who had experienced much use and abuse in her life. And Jesus said this to her in John 4 and verse 10. He said, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that I am, then you would ask me and I would give you living water. You see, the gospel hope that is offered to something like the brokenness that we see from the sexual revolution is Jesus' offer of intimacy, of living water, that there's something greater, that he offers us forgiveness for all of our guilt and shame, for all of the past things that we've done, the shame maybe of things that people have done to us. He invites us to come to him, receive healing, hope, and forgiveness. But then Jesus is the one who offers us to be restored in relationship with God, something we were designed and created for from the beginning. He's pointing us to something so much greater than trying to fill the ache in our heart, the ache and longing in our souls from sexual gratification. True life would not be found in pursuing sexual conquest. Rather, true life would be found in restored relationship with God, and you find that through Christ. So I think that there is gospel hope for a porn-filled world. I think something like this article from Bridget Phetasy can point us to something greater, something much more meaningful than casual hookups. And is that an invitation that you have received? Well, let me know what you think in the comments. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that like button. This is Jason for Soulfire, and I will catch you in the next one.